Are you doing your best work? Does somebody care about your work? Do your opinions count at work? Are you connected to the mission, purpose, vision of the organization? All those types of things. And if you look at virtually every single metric, including even like learning and growing, you'll see that over the past few years, we're pretty much at an all-time low for every single metric.
You're listening to the Elevate Podcast, and I'm your host, Robert Glazer. Join me as I talk to world-class performers about how they build their capacity and reach greater heights in leadership, business, and life, and how you can do the same. Welcome to the Elevate Podcast. Our quote for today is from Brené Brown. Vulnerability is about showing up and being seen. Our guest today, Jacob Morgan, is constantly thinking about the future. He's a futurist and leading author on the future of work, the employee experience, and leadership. He's the best-selling author of 5 books, including his latest, Leading with Vulnerability, which was released in October 2023. Jacob's a TED speaker and the host of the podcast, Great Leadership with Jacob Morgan. Jacob, welcome back to the Elevate Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So we talked about your background, your work, and your first appearance on the show, which was episode 103, way back in 2000.
What are we on now?
Slightly different. I'm on 3-something, I think.
Oh my God.
So 350. So I just wanted to reintroduce you to listeners who've joined since then by asking, what is it that you focus on? What are you most passionate about in your life and work?
Well, life and work are two different things. So life-wise, obviously, I have 2 little kids. I have 2 dogs. I have a wife. I have a great community, friends. So that for me is number one. My family doesn't live too far away from me, my mom and dad. So that's number one for me. And sometimes I have to remind myself that's number one because, like it's very easy to get bogged down with work and to get stressed out by not finishing things. But it's a good reminder for me. Work-wise, you kind of alluded to the 3 areas that I focus on: leadership, employee experience, and the future of work. So I had a new book come out called Leading with Vulnerability. I have a book coming out next year on employee experience. And so I get a lot of fun from speaking, from writing, from creating content, from doing podcasts like this, and really helping people get insights on how the world of work is changing and what that means for all of us.
On your previous appearance, we were in the thick of pandemic. So there was a lot of stuff that we were talking about. It seemed like remote work was here to stay. Everyone was transitioning, trying to figure out. Now, return to office is pretty hot strategy. I always say there's always an equal and opposite reaction.
Yes.
Especially at large companies and legacy industries. If I asked you now that we've kind of had the peak and maybe the pullback, what do you think is the future of remote and hybrid work? And where does it fit in and where does it not fit in?
I'm a big believer in flexible work in general. So, it's something I've talked about even when my book, The Future of Work, came out, I think in 2014, over a decade ago. So I'm a big believer in flexible work. And what I mean by that is there should be a presence in the office, but there should also be certain times when you don't need a presence in the office. And so the big challenge that I have is when we have rigid rules one way or the other. So whether somebody says, okay, 2 days in the office, 3 days from home, or vice versa, or come in every day, or don't come in at all. I think every organization needs to do what makes sense for them. I've always believed in the idea of flexible work, which is, let's assume that you need to be in the office, but if you can't come in a certain time because you have a doctor's appointment or you're booked up with meetings or you talk to your manager and they said you're cool to be at home, that's fine. If you're able to come in for just a few hours and finish up work later, that's fine. But it's having that level of flexibility. I still see tremendous value for in-person work.
Yeah.
And a lot of organizations, honestly, that I'm talking to are wanting their employees back to the office, but it's not back to the office 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. It's back to the office in the sense of let's assume that, yes, this is the company that you work for and you should be here every day at some point. You can come in when it makes sense for you. You can leave when it makes sense for you. If there's certain days you can't come in because you have other commitments, that's okay. But let's go under that assumption that you are working in this location, in this building for a certain amount of time every day. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Again, it's not 9 to 5. Maybe it's a few hours here, a few hours there, but it's having that level of flexibility. And I honestly think that that's the best approach for most organizations. There are a lot of studies that come out in terms of productivity. One that came out, I think today, by Nicholas Bloom over at Stanford in Nature magazine, found out that employees who are working at home 2 days a week, there's no decrease in productivity. There's a reduction in employees who want to leave an organization, things like that. And those numbers and those stats are fine, but we have to remember that there's a lot of stuff that does not get accounted for in those things. Productivity just means you're going to go out of business later. Companies don't just want productivity. They want employees who are willing to go above and beyond. We want to train better leaders. We want to solve complex problems. We want to identify new opportunities.
And a lot of people measure productivity by mouse movements. Let's be honest. That's how a lot of companies were doing it.
So there is a lot
of inputs, not.
So there's a lot of value. And it's funny because as I'm interviewing CHROs for my new book, I talk to some CHROs who are like, yes, we're remote first. We don't have any policies for employees to come back to the office. They can do what they want. I'm like, okay, cool. If that works for you, that's fine. Then I talk to other employees, whether it's a Northrop Grumman or a UPS. They say, we are a in-office culture first. We want employees here 5 days a week. They don't have to be here 9 to 5, but we want them in the office. I talk to other companies that are like, yeah, we're somewhere in the middle. So look, it comes down to, do what makes sense for your company. Right. If I'm a leader of a business and I believe and perceive and see that when my employees are working from home all the time, we struggle with collaboration. It's harder for me as a leader to get a sense of what's going on. We're falling behind deadlines. We're not training leaders the way that we should be. Then yes, I have every right to say, come back to the office because it is impacting our team, our culture, and our business. But if I'm a leader and I say, hey, you know what? Everyone's working from home. It's cool. We got no problems. In fact, we're actually doing better than we were before. Hey, by all means, stay working from home. But I think having these rigid rules that every company should do this or that is not the right approach.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about that. I think there's some nuance between every company should do the same thing versus the company should be clear on its standards. There's 4 tracks I wanted to take out of what you said. So the first is one of the things I think you and I agree on is that too much of these decisions have been about power and authority, right, rather than the work, right? Like you need to be back in it's like a parent exerting their authority over a kid. You need to be back in the office because I said so, right? Versus actually focusing on the work. I've used an example of an investment bank. Mm-hmm. If we're pitching for a $50 million deal, you're not showing up on Zoom. Like, we're at the table, we're breaking bread, we're going to dinner. Like this is what we do. This is sort of what's required. And so I think, as you said, like it should be about the work and where it makes sense and where it doesn't make sense.
But even in that example, let's take that negative example where a company says, I want you back into the office. And the leader says, because I said so. Does the company not have that right? Because this is a company, they're paying your salary. They're paying for your benefits. Yeah. They're paying for the office. They're paying.
No, they have the right. You have the right not to work there.
Exactly. That's the point, right?
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people get upset when they say, "Oh, I can't believe this company is saying that." But you also have a choice to not be at that company, right? So everybody has.
And this goes to the other thing that I think a lot of people, and Steve Jobs, if he was here, probably would agree that a lot of people don't know what's good for them, right? Yeah. A lot of after the pandemic, I agree, people wanted flexibility, but they were saying, I want to work when I want, on what I want, and how I want it. Well, that's not teamwork. But you have everyone saying they don't want to go back into the office, and then you have record numbers of people saying they feel lonely and isolated, and they're not connecting these two. I just found it really funny, I think for younger workers too, I think older people tend to have more diversity in terms of their life and what they can do, and they have a bigger house and not a 400 square foot apartment in terms of using that flexibility. But humans need to be around humans, and I think because it's convenient not to get dressed and stuff doesn't mean it's always the right thing to do.
And it's funny because if you look at Gallup does their Q12, and this is replicated in several other studies, but Gallup does their Q12 where they basically look at these 12 criteria across all sorts of organizations, and these are things like are you doing your best work? Does somebody care about your work? Do your opinions count at work? Are you connected to the mission, purpose, vision of the organization? All those types of things. And if you look at virtually every single metric, including even like learning and growing, you'll see that over the past few years, we're pretty much at an all-time low for every single metric. Every single metric. Okay. So, you can't have it both ways. You can't say, I don't want to come into the office but I'm lonely and disengaged. You can't say, I don't want to come into the office. Why am I not getting promoted into a leadership role? You can't say, I don't want to come into the office. Why am I not getting more responsibility? Why am I not getting, right? It doesn't make sense.
Right.
And so obviously there are two parties here, right? So as an employee, you need to decide what you care about and what you value. I think there's one of the things that we don't talk about is there's a tremendous opportunity out there for employees who are willing to come into the office. So if you have aspirations for leadership, to learn and grow and to really move up inside the organization, it used to be very, very hard to do that because everybody would be in the office. Everybody
Right.
would
People
be
want to FaceTime with their manager.
Right.
Yeah,
Everybody's there.
Yeah.
But now you have a lot of your peers who are saying, nah, I don't want to come into the office.
Right.
Which means that if you're still that employee who wants to get promoted and get into a leadership role, you got to be the one that says, that's cool. You stay at home. I'm happy to go up to the office. Right.
Yeah.
So it's a unique opportunity for those types of leaders because what happens is you get FaceTime with your leaders. You get to see firsthand how your leaders operate in certain situations and environments. You'll get better training and leadership one-on-one time. So it's a benefit for you. So let your peers stay at home. But at the same time, there are a lot of employees out there who say, you know what, I'm good. I don't want to get promoted. I'm comfortable in my role.
Right. For people, I'm an individual contributor and I want to just do my thing.
And I'm good.
Companies have to also decide if that's part of their culture or not.
Yeah.
I remember talking to someone, he was asking me for advice on that. And I was like, you got to decide. Like, do you want a bunch of, individual contributors who don't really want to be part? I don't know. It could be the right answer. You could build a business model around it, or you have to say this isn't who we are. Right. It's
for sure.
The problem is, I think leaders trying to appeal to too many people. And as I think what you were saying before, I misunderstood the first time, but then I think what you were saying was there's no right answer across countries, but companies need to have standards. And I think we agree. Flexibility, if there's an exception. But when people were doing hybrid, my advice was, look, whatever you're doing, just reinforce it. And then people kept asking, all right, really, well, what's the best? There was multiple versions of hybrid. And they're like, which hybrid, there was hybrid come in 3 days a week. There were hybrid come in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and there was hybrid do whatever you want. Yeah. And when people ask me like, which one really, if you had to pick, and I thought about it and I was like, the one that I think is the least valuable is hybrid do whatever you want. Because if you're trying to get people to come into the office and they're coming in when other people aren't there and you're not getting any of the value of being in the office, then I'm not sure the point of that, anyway. And so I think having these standards and say, obviously, if you're sick or whatever, but as the rule, we need you to be in here X hours or X days because this is what we're looking for. We're looking for connection in these meetings. We're looking for creativity. This is how we're going to do training. And like you said, you have to respect that or you have to go somewhere else.
Yeah, and if you want to go somewhere else, that's totally fine. But, I talked to, for example, several companies. I mentioned two, Northrop Grumman and UPS. And I talked to both those companies. They were both. So the thing that they did well is that during the pandemic, they kept reinforcing, we are an in-office culture first. We know that we're going through a pandemic, and during this time, we're temporarily, employees are going to be working where they want. But once we get through this, just a reminder, we are a in-office culture first. Those are the companies that did it well. Those are the smart companies. Where a lot of companies got into trouble is during the pandemic, they
try to appease everyone.
First, work where you want. We don't care about the office anymore. Couple years go by, everybody's used to that.
Right. So then the person moves 2 hours away and then they find out that they're called back into the office and now they live in New Hampshire.
Wait a minute, but you told me that we're remote first. So a lot of companies were very scared to, they were trying to appease everybody. And this kind of goes back to
leaders did not want to put a stake in the ground. They're trying to make everyone happy. This is my advice to any company leader and particularly a university leader. Trying to make everyone happy makes no one happy.
Oh yeah. I saw some of your posts about universities. We can get into that too, but it's funny because I wrote a Substack post, I think it was yesterday or the day before, basically saying that now more than ever before, we need strong leaders. And I feel like pandemic, post-pandemic, leaders collectively have just become weak. I don't know how else to phrase it.
Yeah, I actually feel bad for college students because I don't think they know what good leadership looks like. So they're not able to understand that this is very poor leadership. The mayor of New York has been incredible. I mean, I saw him give a speech yesterday. He advocated for a principle that I've said all along, which is hold the same standard, but clearly state your values. And he said, look, these people, this went on yesterday. I think they have a right to free speech. I think it's morally reprehensible and wrong, what they're saying. It's like, this isn't that hard to do. Like again, you don't change the standard, you don't change the rules, but you can point out where you don't think the outcome is something that, you approve.
Yeah. And for a lot of leaders out there, they were scared to say what's okay, what's not okay. They're scared to talk about, values. Come into the office, don't come into the office. Scared to talk about certain topics, right. Not talk about certain topics. Everybody is just leaders have collectively just gotten so scared of everything. And, we could argue, right?
Trying to make everyone happy.
Yeah, because look at what's happening in the world, right? If you get accused of anything, you make a mistake, you say the wrong thing, everyone is just quick to just like chop your head off. And,
I think Google really did learn from their mistakes on this recently when they had the people start taking over they got into some stuff, taking over the offices and stuff. And they're like, no, it violates all the agreements you signed, all the rules we have. We're not doing that. Right. Yeah. And it wasn't, they probably agreed with some of the things that the people were advocating for,
maybe,
but they were like, this just violates our rules. So you broke the rules. It's seems like pretty straightforward leadership that's very hard for people to do these days.
Yeah, but it's also it's very similar to parenting, right? If you look at how a lot of parents,
I've used the statement. It's over and over. You tell the kid, here's the red line, and you move it, you're dead as a parent.
Yeah. So my wife and I constantly battle with this, right? Because when I travel, and we both are speakers on different topics, but whenever my wife is traveling and I'm home with the kids, things run like clockwork. We have no issues. Because if I make a threat and I tell my kids, if you act like this, TV's gone. You act like this, we're not doing this. They know that I mean it. And there's no, BSing. My wife has a little bit of a harder time sticking to the rules. So she might say something like, if you do this, I might have to put you on timeout or whatever. And he'll say, no, I won't do it again. And she'll say, okay, fine, I won't put you on timeout. And then 5 minutes later, he throws something. And it's like, what did I just tell you? And so they push the bounds.
This is familiar. Yeah.
So I think the same thing is true inside of our organizations, right? You need to be very clear with what the rules and the boundaries are and not be, in most cases, bending those rules. But I think the second thing is companies have also, partially our fault, we've created these environments where we're kind of creating like Pinocchio's Island for employees. So the way that we think about parenting, of a lot of parents who coddle their kids, a lot of Gen Z parents who go to the interviews with their kids, we are so, can we do this for you? Can we do that for you? What can we do for you here? Are you unhappy? This and that. The same thing's happening inside of our organizations.
You're removing the organic cause and effect that you need
and
to
we have
learn
so much, there's a big emphasis on things like employee engagement and well-being programs and things like that, where if you show up to work, you have access to a therapist, free food, a gym. Your employees don't give a bleep about that stuff. Pay them well, give them a great leader, learning and development opportunities, room for growth. Because otherwise what happens is you have an employee, they don't take care of themselves. They sit at home, they do nothing, and then they show up and they say, hey, I'm disengaged. It's your job to fix this for me. And that's the environment that we've created because we have all these programs. Oh, you're disengaged, you're unhappy. Oh my God, come into our office, spend a couple hours talking to a therapist, get a snack. We hope you're okay. It's like, give me a break. You need to teach employees that they're responsible for their engagement too. Right? What are you doing in your personal life to look after your engagement? Are you exercising? Are you eating healthy? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you making time for friends? Like why is it the organization's responsibility to be anything and everything for you? It's completely bonkers. It makes
right.
sense.
It's all been extrinsic, for them versus. So I was just going to ask you about that article that you wrote on this recently. So that was a perfect transition. I have this weird theory. I actually think people want to be held accountable, and they're just not getting it. I have a friend who did an experiment this year in teaching because he was absolutely fed up with the parents and all the school, whatever. And he just made his class harder, and he made the expectations higher, and went the opposite way. Frequent tests, constant tests, all the things that people were asking to get out of.
Yep.
He did the opposite. And he said the outcomes have been so much better, and the kids are actually like it, and they're more engaged, and like people have high expectations of them. He said it's been a fascinating experiment, and it's just we have a generation of the leaders in people's lives until they're 18 are mostly their teachers and their parents. And as you said, there has been no accountability. So it shouldn't be a surprise when these people show up in the workplace and are super surprised when there's accountability. And yeah, this article you just read, you said that employees need to be responsible for their own engagement. This would be news to a lot of people I've met.
Which is crazy. And there was also some recent data that the team over at Workday sent me, where they looked at, I believe it was hundreds of thousands of pieces of data on engagement and when employees drop off. And, we keep talking about employees are getting burned out, they're getting stressed out and this and that. But the Workday data that they analyzed showed that employees are not working too much. It's that they're not getting enough challenging work. And so the burnout and the stress happens because employees are doing drone work. They're doing just garbage work. So it's not that employees are overworked, it's that they're not getting enough challenging work. And so if you create an environment where there is no challenge when employees show up, then you're going to create complacency, and employees are going to drop off. I mean, one CHRO that I talked to, and I won't mention her company name, she said that during the pandemic,
or his name,
or yes, or her name,
you just eliminated half the people. Sorry,
exactly. But she told me during the pandemic, they created this environment where employees were getting, $1,500 a year to spend on whatever they wanted. 90-something% of employees were getting salary increases regardless of performance. You could work from home. It was just, she described it as a culture for children. And then the company took a step back and they're like, hey, we're actually losing money. It's impacting our bottom line. We got to stop this. And so now she's in the process of creating a corporate culture, not for children, but for adults, and teaching people to be accountable. And saying, hey, if you show up to work, you're not automatically getting a raise anymore. Performance matters. How you do matters. How you show up every day matters. And I think we need to get back to that because honestly, the past few years, I think we've collectively lost it.
And this might be a divergence, but I think you have opinion on this, and I'm carefully going to write something on this soon, but I guess I'll pressure test it here. I think there are two mental health crises going on in the workplace. One is there's actually a lot of mental health issues, but they are issues happening outside of the workplace that are being brought into the workplace for which the workplace is responsible. Two, I keep hearing, particularly with employees under 30, that anytime there is a performance issue or a discussion or a problem of the work or other, there is an invocation of mental health. And there's going to be an overreaction to this soon. If we start describing everything as a mental health issue that's uncomfortable, you're going to have people asking for waivers and stuff like that. So as you said, you're talking about before about the therapist. I think that the organization's job is to make sure it's not the cause of mental health problems and its leaders are not the cause of mental health problems. But I'm not sure what organizations are supposed to do when people are bringing those problems into the workplace.
Yeah. And why are you as an employee not responsible for your mental health? I don't understand. Right. Why, right? I mean, if you have employees who work, now I'm not saying you create a toxic environment and I don't care, you're an idiot, nothing like that.
Right. That to me is you're causing the problem. Yes. That's bad.
But
right.
If, for example, there was this crazy video that I saw on, it was trending, I think on X or someplace, of an employee who made a video, and she was complaining about her mental health, and I'm trying to remember the exact phrasing that she did, but she was always late to things. And she described her mental health as, I don't know exactly the terminology, but it was an excuse for why she's always late because she perceives time differently than everybody else. And she said, I don't know why my company's not willing to accommodate because I have this issue where I don't see time like everybody else. And I'm sitting there removing my head from the wall after
about to lose your mind,
running it through it. And it's gotten so they're so to the extreme that.
Well, this is postmodernism, that if we don't have any objective truths that we agree to, that is a problem because your doctor for your appointment probably perceives that 12 o'clock is 12 o'clock. So for those things, you're going to need to conform.
And look, life is hard.
Yeah.
Work is hard. Leadership is hard. Everything is hard. I
Tough feedback
yeah,
is
my
hard, but it's a
parents are
gift. It's
immigrant
not.
parents. They came
Yeah.
from the Republic of Georgia. They came here with nothing. They were poor. They didn't speak the language. So for me, I have a very, very hard time feeling sorry for anybody, because when I would complain about things,
Yeah.
my parents would just look at me and say, "And like, what's the problem?" I'd say, "Oh, this happened. This happened. I got beat up at school. I can't do this." They'd be like, "Yeah, and go solve your problem. Like, what do you want us to do about it?"
Yeah.
And so we don't have that environment anymore, where it's, you know, we've taken away accountability for employees. Like, you are a human being and an
We've
adult in this
taken it,
world.
and I think that's accurate. I think we've taken it away because they're coming at an environment that's never held them to it,
Yeah.
and when they find it in the workplace for the first time, it is jarring. It is jarring for them, and then so people back off.
Yeah.
Versus like, hey, this is. I think a lot of leaders of younger employees and stuff are finding that themselves probably learning parenting before they're even having kids.
Yeah. And I'm not discounting the fact that it's hard, but yes, everything is hard. Finding a job is hard.
Yeah.
When I was first looking for a job, I got turned down. I sent out hundreds of cover letters, hundreds of resumes. I got turned down from every single company that I applied for. I got turned down from being a bank teller. I got turned down from working at Best Buy. I was losing my mind until finally I got the opportunity to go work at a clothing store, making just above minimum wage, selling like t-shirts and stuff like that with a college degree. But on my spare time, I was learning about search engine optimization and online marketing and affiliate marketing, and tried to build up something. And then, so yes, everything is hard, but what do you want? You want it to be easy? I don't understand. And I don't know, maybe it's just how I was raised. Maybe it's my mentality, but I do not understand the idea of like, it should be easy. Like, the way that I raise my kids is life is going
well, the world's
to be
not
hard.
right. The problem is, for history, the world has not been easy, but somehow in the last generation, we have told everyone it should be easy. And so their expectations are out of whack with reality, right? And if you think it's going to be hard and it's a little easier, then you feel good. Objectively, I don't think things are harder or easier. I think it's a function of expectation.
And it's also how you're raised. Because I have friends who raise their kids very differently than I raise my kids. And they do everything and anything for them. These kids have never struggled. They've never had hardship. They've never had anything. And we're good friends with them. And we talk about this sometimes, but I just imagine as they progress in life and they get into more difficult situations, they're not going to know how to cope. I mean, if you look at the CEO of NVIDIA, he did some interviews recently, and he said, "I want you to struggle. I want you to have a hard time." Like, I
wrote about that. He went to Stanford and was basically like, "I wouldn't hire any of you. You've all had it too easy."
Yeah, exactly. And it's the thing is, that is a real and honest perspective. But if you say that today, people get mad at you. If you talk about hard work, if you talk about making sacrifice, if you talk about going above and beyond, God forbid you talk about any of these things, people look at you and like, how dare you? How dare you tell me to make sacrifices and go above and beyond and this and that? I was a true story. I was on a podcast recently, and I won't mention the podcast. And she was asking me questions about how people can be successful executives but not have to work hard. That's like what the podcast was about. It was like working parents who want to be C-level executives and they want to have this great balance and it should be easy and this and that. And I got onto her podcast. I'm like, I got to be honest with you. That's not accurate, because I've interviewed a lot of CEOs who have worked so incredibly hard. Like Randy Parker, who's a podcast they just released today, told me that there were times where he was working internationally and he would have to have 10 o'clock meetings and then 6 a.m. meetings. There was periods of his life where he worked so hard, he had to live separately from his family because he was working so much and the company was going through a tough time. But now he's he's a CEO there. Frank Blake, the former CEO of the Home Depot, told me he would give up all of his Sundays to write handwritten note cards for all of his employees every single Sunday and then give them to employees when he would show up to the office. So I did this podcast with this lady, and in the middle of it, she's like, "Okay, we have to stop. I don't think I can air this." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "Yeah, this is against like the message that I'm trying to give to my audience." And I'm sitting there thinking,
the truth. The message is the truth.
Yeah, and I was like, I said, "Look, I'm happy to talk about some strategies that people can use, But you need to be honest with the people who are listening to your show that if you have aspirations to get into senior leadership roles, and if you think you're not going to work harder and care more than everybody else around you, I don't know what planet you're living on. Right?
It's important to understand that doesn't have to be the aspiration. It doesn't have to be the success, doesn't. But you can have anything you desire as long as you're willing to do what's required. Yeah. Right. I always like that quote. And so I think there are a lot of people for whom those jobs are immense sacrifices and they regret it. Right. But that's a decision to make, but it's impossible to, and look, this is why companies are having a hard time getting people up to lead. A global organization, it's real time, 24/7. Now, these are hard jobs that take over all of your life. You don't have to want that, but it's kind of, you need the want not, need not thing. But the problem is if you have all the needs, but you don't want to do the work, then that's where the problem is.
I don't think anybody has any vision of working for any of Elon Musk's companies thinking they're going to have an easy time. Like, nobody applies to work at Tesla or SpaceX or X thinking, you know what, I'm going to have like this great work-life balance. Yeah, I'm going to chill. I think anybody who goes to work for Elon Musk knows, you know what, I'm going to work like a crazy person. I'm probably going to get paid well. I'm going to learn so much, and I get to, learn from Elon potentially. Like, I'm all in. I'll do whatever it takes. Nobody goes there having these different aspirations, or like the message is not confused for Elon. And then there are probably other organizations, if you go work for a company like Microsoft or Satya Nadella, where you might say, you know what, I'll probably work hard, but there's much more of an emphasis on these other types of things, well-being and health and balance. So you need to pick and choose the type of company that you want to work with and for, and you need to decide, do I want to be in leadership or not? Right. So, but if you have goals of, I want to solve really complex and big problems, I want to be paid really well, I want to get into an executive role at some point in my career, then your expectation of what is required to do that should be aligned with the output that you're expecting to receive. So
yes, 100%.
Somewhere in life, these two things got thrown out of balance, where people were like, I could probably just work like 35, 40 hours a week and still become a top executive. Find me an executive on planet Earth at a normal size organization who is in that leadership role, who works 35 to 40 hours a week. They don't exist.
I've been reading a couple times a year. I circle around our industry and I read Glassdoor reviews just to get a sample of the temperature in the agency world. And since post-COVID, there's been an exhaustion. But I regularly see things like, now this company expects that you will work more than 35 hours a week regularly, or 40. And these are agencies and in your 20s. And I'm not someone who at all believes, hours for hours sake. I'm much more work smart. But my friend was explaining to me this problem with doctors and the restrictions on their hours is that while they're training, they're not getting the same amount of experience. Yeah. When they were working 100-hour week shifts, they were getting a ton of exposure. And if they're capped at 50 and they're doing the same 3-year residency, they're seeing a lot less patients. Your 20s is actually the time when it's just learning. It's like a sponge. It's not working for the point of, but it's fascinating to me where it would be. And that when people say they're working 60-hour weeks, they're really working 50. And when they say 50, 40, but the baseline expectation, that the horror of working over 40 hours a week, like, let's be honest, a 40-hour work week is 9 to 5 with an hour lunch break. Like no one's killing themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
in white collar work.
Yeah. And similarly, a doctor, like, does anybody on planet Earth think that if you're going to become a doctor or a surgeon, you're not going to work like a sociopath? I mean, my father-in-law is a doctor. He told me, the amount of hours that he would put in, how much coffee he would be drinking. It's like, you have to be realistic here with what's required. And to your point, but the thing is, there's also nothing wrong with that. We get a lot of purpose and meaning and joy and fulfillment from the work that we do. Now, obviously, if you're doing something that you hate and you're being forced to work 60, 70 hours a week, that's different. For me, example,
but if you're on the path to mastery, or you're on the path to your 10,000 hours, you should be like a sponge and engage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for me, for example, and I'm sure it's probably for you, I love what I do. I work more than 40 hours a week, more than 50 hours a week, probably in some situations, 60 hours a week. I'm working whenever I can work because I genuinely enjoy the work that I'm doing and I get fulfillment from it and I get connections from it. My wife talking about it. We create, we have great conversations and discussions about it. But that also plays a role. But look, I'm, trying to write books and create a speaking career and build a business. So I know that if I want to do these things and be successful at it, I'm going to have to put in a lot of time. I'm under no reservations. I don't have any like misconstrued expectations that I can just chill and then all these things are going to kind of be on autopilot. So I think people need a healthy dose of reality in today's world, and to also understand that there's nothing wrong with these things. There's nothing wrong with hard work. You, at the end of the day, have a choice. I'm working too hard. This company's not for me. That's great. Go work for another organization. Right. All good.
But there are two things that are also harder usually, foraging, for food every day or sustenance, or running your own business, right? Yeah. which fundamentally are the other options at the end of the day.
Exactly. You can grow your own farm, move somewhere where it's
take it all in perspective. Yeah. But I'm interested. This actually dovetails nicely because I want to talk about the new book, Leading with Vulnerability, and I think this accountability and vulnerability, which I think people would think are counterintuitive, would talk about how they actually fit together. So, I guess the first question is like, why is being vulnerable and leading with vulnerability different things, as you say?
Yeah. And so they are different things, and probably counter to what a lot of people think. I always tell everybody, don't be vulnerable at work, instead lead with vulnerability. So vulnerability is this idea of exposing or sharing a gap that you have. The classic example I always use is your leader gives you a project to do, you screw up, and now you have to come clean about it. And so you have to go through this very vulnerable experience where you go to your manager and say, hey, I'm really sorry. I made a mistake. I screwed this up. It probably cost us money. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry. But the problem with doing that, especially in the context of work, is that no leader is going to look at you and say, oh, it's all good. Thank you for telling me. But your leader is going to look at you and say, okay, well, I'm glad you told me about the mistake that you made, but the problem is still there. We still didn't meet our numbers. Customer is still not happy. Project has still not been done. Deadline has still not been met. So as much as, it's great that you have the psychological safety that you need to come and tell me that you made that mistake, but now I need you to figure out what you're going to do to fix it. So leading with vulnerability is not just talking about the gap that you have, but demonstrating what you're trying to do to close the gap. So instead of just saying, I'm sorry I made a mistake, you say, I'm sorry I made a mistake. Here's what I learned from that mistake. Here's what I'm going to do to make sure that that mistake never happens again. That is being vulnerable, and also adding the leadership piece, how I'm closing that gap. And I think we've spent a lot of time on the vulnerability piece, on the psychological safety piece. But even Dr. Peter Capelli, I believe, he wrote an article for Wharton where he was talking about that we can have too much psychological safety inside of our organizations. And at that point, and too much psychological safety means that you show up to work and you can do no wrong, right? Everything you do is okay. There's no such thing as a bad question. You can say what you want, do what you want. If you make a mistake, it's okay. And his argument, which I totally agree with, is that yes, you can have too much psychological safety. You can create an environment where people are almost too comfortable with everything. And so his argument was, you just need just the right amount of psychological safety. You just need a little bit. You don't need to like go crazy with it. And I fully believe in that mentality. So again,
right, I screwed this up. You do you is not the right answer.
No, it's not. It's not. So you want to have that, some level of psychological safety where people can come forward, but you also want people to be accountable and responsible. And as I mentioned, during the past few years, we've over-indexed on the vulnerability piece, the feelings piece, the come forward and just share what you want. How are you doing kind of piece. But we forget that we are at work. You are being paid. You have customers. You have projects. You have deadlines. Like, what are you doing? Where's the leadership piece, the competence piece, the confidence piece, the motivation, the getting better? Like, what happened to all that?
Right. Some people need a firewall. Yes, like it's great that you can tell us about the problems you've had with your babysitter bailing on you and help you out. But after 2 weeks of hearing that, people don't want to hear it.
Did you figure out what's going on with your babysitter?
They don't want it to be an excuse.
Yeah.
Right.
Did you solve your problem? If you keep bringing your problems and making them everybody else's problems, how is that helpful?
I've said this a lot. I think, because again, I really like your take on this. I think I'm a big believer in sort of leading vulnerably and being able to say the tough stuff, but also reminding everyone why we're here and what we're doing. And, this sounds like tough love, but look, the employees that can't firewall certain things, they're just not trusted by, because I don't know, am I going to get Jake, there's a place for emotions and vulnerability in the workplace, particularly when something's going on, it's an exception or otherwise. But just like everything, if you overuse it, and I'm not sure which Jacob I'm going to get today, and whether he's going to show up and be great or fall apart and tell me about, the problems in his relationship for the 7th time in 2 weeks. The truth is, as a leader, I stopped trusting Jacob. I stopped assigning him my important projects. I stopped giving him the work because I don't know which Jacob is going to show up every day.
Yeah, there's a concept in psychology called the pratfall effect, which basically states that if you are competent and very good at your job, and then you're vulnerable, people view you as being even more capable, more talented. In other words, you get like a little bit of a 1 + 1 = 3 effect. Because what's happened is you've demonstrated...
What is it called again? That's interesting. I haven't heard of that.
Pratfall effect. Pratfall effect.
Pratfall.
Okay. Yeah. And so the reason for that is because you've already demonstrated that you're highly competent. And now when you're vulnerable, people view you as being human. It's like, oh, so-and-so is really good at their job. Wow, they made a mistake too? Like, I see you as a human being now. So you get that boost. But the flip side of this is also true. And I interviewed Elliot Aronson, who developed this. He's one of the people I interviewed for the book on leading with vulnerability. And he told me the flip side of this is also true. If you're not good at your job and you're vulnerable, what it does is it reinforces your mediocrity. In other words, what happens is people look at you and they say, oh yeah, I get why you're struggling. I get why you're not getting promoted, because you keep talking about the gaps that you have. I made a mistake. Right. I'm sorry.
Right. You have no confidence, which is why you're probably struggling. Right.
Yeah. So if you only talk about your gaps when you show up to work, people will look at you and say, yeah, you get crystallized in that aura of mediocrity. But even if you're struggling, if you talk about what you're doing to solve your problems, I'm going through a tough time, but I hired this leadership coach, or here's what I'm doing here. Now people look at you and they say, oh, wow, okay. Now you have a different aura around you of like, this person's trying to get better. They're taking me seriously. I like the initiative, the accountability. You get viewed differently. So competence and vulnerability do have a very, very important relationship with each other.
That's super interesting. And I had not heard of that before, but that explains so much. I've always chalked it up a little more to emotional intelligence. Again, there's the people who when they like need... Yeah, but again, is it the exception of the rule? Like, Jacob had a really rough day and he told us his mom's sick, and this is the first time I've ever heard him talk about this, or this is every other week, right? There is a difference, and it sounds callous, but like, try to explain to people there is a difference. And I've talked to so many leaders, and again, in that second example you described, they just start taking away opportunities from others people because they don't trust their competence.
Yeah. I mean, I had somebody on my team many years ago that I worked with, who every time we would get onto meetings, I'm having a tough time here. My mom here, my dog is sick here, this and that. And I tried to be as compassionate as I can. Is there something I can do? Do you need some time? Do you want to reschedule? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And after, a couple of months of this, it's just, I had to be honest and say, look, I totally get that you're going through a tough time. Maybe we can revisit this relationship again in the future, but now I don't think you're the right person for this team because we're struggling and you're impacting the team. And it seems like you're not able to take care of the things that you need to take care of to be an effective member of the team. So go take care of what you need to take care of. If in the future we're able to work together.
It reminds me of people who show up habitually late to things, but with a completely different excuse and reason that they have believed deep. I was on a board for years, and the woman was never on time to a single board meeting, and she would rush into the room, and there was traffic, and there was an accident. I'm sorry, and this happened, and eventually someone's like, "Look, you just gotta leave 15 minutes earlier." Like,
you don't know how to manage your time.
You don't know how to manage your time, and everyone in the room can see it, but you don't, and that's the worst, right?
Yeah, that's not healthy. So, all of this really comes down to be an adult, right? Be a grown up, be accountable, be responsible for yourself personally and professionally. And it might sound a little tough love, but I truly believe that nobody's going to look out for you but you. So if you show up to work assuming that your company is going to solve your problems, your company is going to make you engaged, your company is going to take care of your
company's responsible for your mental health. I think this is
it's
a huge
not right. And look,
right.
if your company has some resources out there, sure, take advantage of them. But it's not realistic for you to assume that your company is going to solve all your problems. And you know,
and by the way, can I just say one thing there that's really important? I think the companies that have tried to solve everyone's problems and the world's problems and stuff the last couple of years have completely lost focus and are struggling financially. So there are some companies that have tried to capitulate to employees wanting them to be everything to everyone, but like you shouldn't run a mental health clinic, right? No. You can provide that benefit, but that's not your job as an employee. If you make widgets, you're trying to figure out how to make the best widgets to make sure there's a mark. So I actually think the companies that have capitulated to this are suffering from a lack of focus.
Yeah, and it's okay to say no. The same thing if you have kids, it's okay to tell your children, you can't have any more ice cream, we're done. It's okay to tell your employees, you can't have that. Yes, you should be in the office. No, you can't say that. No, you can't do that. You can say no.
Yeah.
And I think the sooner that organizations and leaders understand that, like, hey, wait a minute, let's understand what's going on here. I mean, why does a company hire you? A company hires you because they're saying, hey, we have an issue or an opening, or we have something that we're trying to solve, and we need somebody skilled and talented and capable to be able to do that. You say, hey, you know what? I'm really good at that. I could take care of that for you. And the company says, great, you're hired. That's the relationship, right? And so in exchange for you being able to help this company, the company pays you. And now they're giving you benefits and they're giving you perks and they're giving you more and more stuff. Like that's the core of the relationship. Nowhere in the contract does it say, hey, if you start working here, by the way, we are going to take care of all your food. We're going to take care of your well-being. Right. We're going to make sure that you're mentally and physically healthy. It's like, whoa.
Right. The company provides, again, the context, the company provides payment towards your health insurance. They are not in the business of making sure your leg's okay. Right. It's a benefit. They outsource it. Right. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of things that we've conflated that. I mean, in other countries, the healthcare is not the responsible. In the U.S., it's very out of the norm and I think it's made people to believe that other things are the responsibility of the company.
Yeah. Yeah. So, kind of the way to think about it is if your company has anything like that, thank your lucky stars. That shouldn't be the norm. It should not be the norm. Your company has no obligation or responsibility to do these things for you. But we're doing it because we're so desperate to get people to like even the work from home. The fact that we have to convince employees, lure them to come to the office is just mind-boggling for me. Because when I was younger, when my dad was younger, I'm sure even when you were younger, the very fact that somebody was willing to pay you to have a job was like, oh my God, that's awesome. But now you have to be convinced to show up to the office. Crazy. And
if you want to be a free agent, if you want to be a gig worker, that comes with totally different exchanges, right? Exactly. But now I'm curious though, you interviewed 100 CEOs for this book, and one of the things you talked to them all about was how they add vulnerability in their leadership. What were some of the biggest surprises or takeaway? Because it sounds like, again, if you think about lead with vulnerability and hearing how you're talking about it, it's not what a lot of people would think. No. So what were some of the surprises or the counterintuitive things that you took from those interviews?
Well, one is that all these leaders understand and recognize the importance and value of vulnerability, but they all recognize that inside of an organization, it's a different dynamic. Because as we talked about earlier, inside of a company, you have leaders, a project, deadlines, customers, a boss, you're being paid money. And so while they all understood the importance of vulnerability in their personal lives with friends and family members and spouses, where it's a different dynamic. You don't have these same types of rules or guidelines there. They were all trying to figure out, how do I apply this inside of my organization? In fact, the number one thing when we surveyed 14,000 employees, we said, what keeps you from being vulnerable at work? And everybody said, I don't want to be perceived as being weak or incompetent. And so because you don't want to be perceived as being weak or incompetent, you avoid vulnerability. But what if you can add the competence to the vulnerability? In other words, you don't just talk about the gap, you demonstrate what you're trying to do to close the gap. that kind of removes that negative perception that people are going to have of you. So that was a very, very interesting for me. The second thing is that a lot of these leaders were very conflicted because they kept saying, look, on the one hand, my employees want me to talk about my weaknesses and challenges and failures and mistakes. But on the other hand, my employees want me to be this strong, visionary, competent leader. They want to turn to me knowing that I have things figured out. And they kept saying, well, I don't know what kind of leader I'm supposed to be here. Do I talk about the mistakes and failures?
Yeah, this is the principle you were just talking about.
Like which leader am I supposed to be? So that was also very interesting. And then just the stories that people shared with me of, I mean, there's some crazy stories of what CEOs have gone through, what people have done to them, what they've done to other people as far as backstabbing and just some of the stories almost read like, I don't know, comedic novels or like spy films when you hear the things that go on behind closed doors inside of a lot of organizations. But it was just very surprising. And also how open some of these CEOs were with me. A lot of them told me that vulnerability is a very uncomfortable thing for them, like physiologically. Yeah. Like their heart beats, their palms get sweaty. One CEO shared that he had panic attacks. Vulnerability is uncomfortable for everybody. Everybody. Nobody says, oh yeah, I love it. But you do it because as a leader, to become better, you have to acknowledge that you have gaps and you have to do something to close those gaps. And so a lot of these leaders do it because that's what they signed up for, right? You've signed up to do this, and so you have to do it. So there are a lot
there's a real vulnerability paradox there. Like I get that. That is hard. How do you share the right amount of like, you know, if you get on the phone every day, oh golly shucks, I screwed up. You know, people are going, I'm not going down on this guy's ship. Like he seems like a terrible captain. Like I don't have a good answer to that. Like that is a tough order to make sure that you're and maybe it's being real. I think to show people more that you're real and that you're human, you're not infallible. But yes, you have to project an aura of confidence in that you know what you're doing in leadership, or you'll scare everyone off.
Yeah. And there needs to be this idea of intention, right? So why is it that you're doing or sharing whatever it is that you're doing or sharing? If you don't have intention behind it, then it kind of becomes like, I don't know, a therapy session. So for everybody who's listening and watching, when they're thinking about being vulnerable at work, you should ask yourself, well, why do I want to share this? Is it going to help create trust with my team? Is it going to help us improve collaboration? Is it like, what is the purpose of me doing this?
This is right. It's not performative virtue signaling because I saw someone else do it. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's never a good thing.
Let me ask you, I saw an article you wrote recently. I thought it was super interesting because we just had Michael Watkins on who wrote The First 90 Days. And you said when stepping into a new leadership role, the first thing a leader says to their team at the first company meeting has a huge impact on their success. So A, what's the data behind that, or where kind of, and B, okay, what should I say then? Yeah. what do we do and what do we not do if it determines our entire arc of success?
Sure. I mean, how leaders communicate makes a big difference. I don't know if there's any official survey or study that's been done on like a first promotion messaging and how that gets communicated. But from a lot of people that I've talked to, and we know this, right? When we get promoted, usually what happens is your leader at the time will say, hey, you just got promoted to a leadership role. Why don't you kind of, say something to the team? You're taking over, say something. And we've all been in those situations. We've all had to do it, or we've seen other people do it. And, kind of the vulnerable approach to it that I've seen lots of times and have heard lots of times is somebody will go in front of their team and they'll say, hey, I'm a first time leader here. I'm so excited to be running, being a part of this team. I know we're going to make some awesome things happen. I get I've never done this before. I'm a little bit nervous about it, but, I think we'll be able to figure things out. Everything will be great. On the surface, it doesn't sound like a terrible message. There's some vulnerability in there, but nobody's going to walk away from that message thinking, yeah, we're in great.
I got to go follow this person.
We're in great hands with this person that just said that they're nervous and they've never done this before, and like they hope we figure it out. So instead, as a first-time leader, you could give a similar message with vulnerability, but add leadership. So you could say everything that I just said. First-time leader, I'm nervous, I've never done this before, blah 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 blah, and then say, but to help make sure I'm going to be the best leader that you've ever had, I have an executive coach that I'm going to be working with. James, the chief marketing officer, is going to be checking in with me once a week to make sure that I'm moving in the right direction. Here are 3 leadership books that I picked up that I'm going to be going through. I encourage you to follow along as well. And my door's always open for any feedback and suggestions that you have. And I'm really going to work on trying to be a great leader, and together we'll be able to make amazing things happen. That's a very different message. Now people are going to look at you and they're going to say, okay, yeah, I get it. You're kind of new in this role, but wow, you're taking this seriously. Like, you're really trying to be that great leader. And so the perception about you changes. And again, it's not like you've done this before and you're a master, leader, and you've been a CEO and this and that. You're acknowledging you've never done this, but you're also letting people know, how am I going to be this best version that I can be? And I think that's a very important message to give to people.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest takeaways from this conversation is that, like, the vulnerability is great, but whatever you're exposing in the vulnerability, you should also be talking about how you're solving that or addressing for it. Or else it's fun. It has value the first time you hear it, but then the second and third time you hear it, it's going to feel like a problem, rather than something positive.
Yep. Leadership plus vulnerability equals leading with vulnerability. You got to remember to have both those things: leadership and vulnerability, the heart and the lighthouse, as I like to think about it.
All right, Jacob, where can people learn about you, your work, and the new book?
A couple different places. The book is available wherever you can find a book. We made a website for it called leadwithvulnerability.com. I have a Substack that people can follow, which is greatleadership.substack.com. And then my email, if people are curious to connect with me, is jacob@thefutureorganization.com. So my website is thefutureorganization.com. And then we actually put together, I think it's still up. Let me check. So I did a PDF on the top leadership trends for 2024, and some of these things are in there. And so, yes, it's still up, topleadershiptrends.com. So if people go there, they can download this PDF on some of the things that we've talked about today.
All right, great. Well, thank you for coming back to join us. This was a fascinating conversation. And since I know you're a prodigious author, we'll have you when you release the next one, we'll have you back on and we'll do it again.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for having me.
To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to the Elevate podcast today. We'll include links to Jacob and his work on the detailed episode page at robertglazer.com. Thanks again for your support. Until next time, keep elevating.